Ever been told gear doesn't really matter in landscape photography, or that keeping your ISO low is a must? Well, I used to think the same, but things changed for me once I started questioning those ideas. Welcome back to the second part of our myth-busting series. If you haven't seen part one yet, where we shattered myths about location, light, color, and creative expression, be sure to check it out after this one. Today, in part two, we'll take a closer look at the technical side of landscape photography, exploring lesser-known myths around gear, settings, and the social side of things. I'll share what I've learned about navigating these topics so you can tackle the technical stuff without losing your creative spark. In today's video, we're going to simplify things. We'll cover why our gear might matter more than you think, not less, how to break free from rigid rules about settings, and why landscape photography doesn't always have to be a solo pursuit. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of the technical myths of photography and feel more confident in making choices that support your own creative style and workflow. Just like last time, we'll use a simple framework for each myth. We'll start by looking at the partial truth, then we'll jump into the full story, and we'll finish up by looking at some actionable tips so you can apply these to your own photography. I almost decided to leave this one out of the video. I know it's going to be a bit controversial and we might have some mixed opinions, but let's talk about it. Does gear really matter in landscape photography? The classic argument against gear being important is that a skilled photographer can capture amazing images with any camera. And to a considerable extent, that's true. Vision, composition, and understanding of light are far more important than the latest and greatest gear. But I've also learned that high-end gear can make a big difference, especially when we learn how to get the most out of it. Advanced gear often provides better resolution, dynamic range, durability, usability, ergonomics, all kinds of things that improve your experience and your results, especially in challenging conditions. Gear doesn't make someone a good photographer, but it can elevate a good photographer to new heights. Better dynamic range means capturing more details in the highlights and shadows, especially in challenging, windy conditions when you can't bracket. Improved low light performance allows us to shoot at higher ISOs without sacrificing image quality, literally allowing us to shoot longer. And sharper lenses can reveal intricate details and textures that might otherwise be lost. Not only that, let's admit it, it's fun to try new gear, learn new features, and apply techniques like automated focus stacking to make images that would otherwise be really hard to make. So whether people like to admit it or not, new gear can help keep us motivated and out there shooting. I recently experienced some of the anti-gear backlash firsthand when I reviewed the Nikon Z8, which of course is a fantastic camera in many ways, and it also has limitations, particularly for landscape photographers. And when I pointed out some of those limitations, some folks in the comments got pretty upset and defensive, arguing that gear doesn't matter, or how could I complain using any modern camera given that people used to shoot on slide film with 20-pound tripods. And I do understand where that perspective is coming from. We have a lot to be grateful for. And there's definitely some truth to it. But consider this, advancements in technology, whether it's a new mobile app, a more gas-efficient car, or really any new innovation, open up new possibilities. And it's no different with photography equipment. And I've seen firsthand how cheap gear can sometimes hold back my workshop participants. Some students with entry-level cameras struggle to get the results they want. I've also seen photographers who wisely invest in good glass, but have poor quality tripods, backpacks, and other accessories that they then spend a whole bunch of time and frustration trying to overcome instead of capturing the scene. To be fair, I've also seen the opposite. Students with top-of-the-line gear who find it overwhelming because they haven't gotten to know it well enough. So to be clear, I'm not suggesting we need the most expensive gear out there to take great photos, but investing in quality gear, even if it's just a few key pieces, has made a huge difference in my experience in nature and the results I'm able to come home with. Skill, creativity, and a willingness to experiment will always be the foundation of great photography. However, the right tools, when mastered, can elevate our craft and open up new creative possibilities. Because photography is so important to me, I've chosen to invest in the best gear I can afford. But I also don't stress about having the latest model. Start by investing in a good quality lens and a sturdy tripod. These two pieces of gear will have the biggest impact on your image quality. As your skills and budget allow, consider upgrading your camera body or adding additional lenses to your kit. No matter if we have the most expensive gear or we're shooting with our cell phone, we still need to choose the right focal length. And since we're talking about landscape photography here, that pretty much means wide angles, right? Wide-angle lenses have long been a go-to for landscape photographers. They're awesome for those big, sweeping shots that we all love in landscape photography. They capture sweeping vistas, dramatic skies, and a sense of grandeur. For years after I started, my longest lens was 200 millimeters, and it collected a lot of dust on the shelf. My early shots were heavily biased towards wider focal lengths. There was, and still is, something so satisfying about the wide-angle grand scene style of landscape photography. The way that the composition pulls us through the enlarged foreground, through to the midground and background, the challenge of arranging and separating all the different parts, the way all the pieces come together, often involving multiple exposures for focus or dynamic range, and the immersive, fantasy-like feelings these images can evoke. My wide angle will always be a part of my kit. But as time has passed, I find myself reaching for my 100 to 400 more and more these days. Telephoto lenses completely change how we see a familiar landscape. It allows us to compress perspective, create a sense of intimacy and mystery, and make unique images, even from popular areas. Last week, I was up at Mount Rainier hoping to catch the end of wildflower season. So I got up super early and hiked 2,000 feet up in the dark to a location with a broad vista. As first light hit, I was all set up for the classic wide-angle shot with flowers in the foreground and the Tatoosh Range in the background. But things didn't go as planned. The flowers were past their prime and the sky was bland, leaving me feeling pretty uninspired. The grand scene just wasn't coming together. That's when I switched to my telephoto lens. Zooming in, I started noticing all kinds of fascinating details lost in the broader view. Here, I was drawn to the way this river of low clouds flowed over the mountains. There could have been 20 photographers standing next to me, and I probably would have captured something unique. We don't always need to capture an entire scene to tell a compelling story. In fact, we often don't want to. I realized I could tell more intimate, focused stories by honing in on specific parts of the scene. Sometimes the most powerful images come from what we choose to leave out, not what we include. Plus, using a telephoto lens has other benefits too, namely that we can photograph outside of the golden hour. So it's great for those of us who aren't always willing or able to give up sleep or hike back in the dark. So what is your image about? What do you want to say about the scene? How did it make you feel? Here are a few tips. Even on longer trips when you'd rather save the weight, having a telephoto lens in your kit broadens your creative possibilities. Plus, you'll be less dependent on weather and conditions. Use your telephoto lens to focus on specific elements within the landscape, such as a lone tree, a distant mountain peak, or some unique pattern. Zoom in on patterns, textures, or shapes within the landscape to create abstract and evocative images. The best lens is the one that helps us tell the story we want to tell, and experimenting with longer focal lengths helps us narrow our story's focus. But wide-angle lenses aren't the only thing people rely on. How about tripods? How essential are they, really? Tripods are a staple in many landscape photographers' kits. They offer stability, precision, and the ability to capture long exposures. But how necessary are they really? Tripods are undeniably useful in many situations. They're essential for capturing sharp images in extremely low light or when using really long shutter speeds. They allow for precise framing and composition, helping us slow down and immerse ourselves in our composition. They allow us to blend multiple exposures more easily, whether for focus, dynamic range, or even time blending shots that were taken hours apart. But I've found that relying too much on a tripod can sometimes take away from the fun and freedom of composing handheld. Sometimes the best shots happen in the blink of an eye, and fumbling with a tripod can mean missing the moment entirely. Handheld shooting allows for greater freedom and flexibility. We can quickly adjust our position and capture fleeting moments of light and atmosphere. With good technique and attention to settings, you'll be more spontaneous, move more quickly, and can still capture stunningly sharp images. And with modern camera stabilization technology, high frame rates, high ISO performance, and better software for noise reduction, it's easier than ever to achieve sharp images even without a tripod. On a trip to Rainier, I came across this amazing waterfall. The fog had just rolled in, and the rocky terrain was challenging for a tripod, so I decided to ditch the tripod and shoot handheld, which enabled me to move more freely, capturing the waterfall from different angles and perspectives until I honed in on my precise composition. In years past, I would have set up my tripod, maybe adjusted it once or twice, and that would have been my composition. But this time, with my camera's in-body stabilization turned on, I slowed the shutter to around 1/5 of a second for that silky smooth water effect, and capturing one last frame at 1/20th of a second for all the sharp foliage. The resulting images had a sense of energy and spontaneity that I wouldn't have achieved with a tripod, and they're still sharp. So unless I'm shooting in dark conditions, I'm not afraid to go tripod free. Doing so gives me a bit more creative freedom to explore different angles and perspectives. Here are a few tips. Nearly every modern camera has in-body image stabilization, so I find that the 1 over focal length rule is a little bit outdated, and I find that I can usually bring that considerably lower when vibration reduction is turned on. Practice good hand-holding technique. Hold your camera close to your body, brace your elbows against your sides, and take a deep breath before pressing the shutter button. It really does add up to a sharper image. But what about ISO settings? Is it still true that we have to keep the ISO as low as possible? Now, this one's supposedly all about image quality. We've all heard the mantra, lower ISO, less noise. But I've learned it's not always that simple. It's true that lower ISO settings produce cleaner images, all other things being equal. Lower ISO also means a higher dynamic range in most cases. And in ideal lighting condition, there's really no reason not to shoot at the lowest native ISO our subject allows. But modern cameras can handle higher ISO settings, and sometimes a little bit of noise is a small price to pay for capturing the shot that we want. Raising our ISO slightly allows us to use faster shutter speeds or smaller apertures, or both, which can be crucial in low light or when our subject is moving. Think about it, in low light, we need to either use a slower shutter speed or a wider aperture to let in more light. But a slow shutter speed can lead to blurry images, especially if you're shooting handheld or capturing moving subjects. And a wider aperture will result in a shallow depth of field, which might not be ideal for the scene. And that's where higher ISO settings come in. They allow us to maintain a faster shutter speed and narrower aperture, even in challenging lighting conditions. And with modern noise reduction software, we can often minimize the impact of noise reduction in post-processing, so it's almost negligible. I used to be obsessed with keeping my ISO as low as possible, which sometimes meant those images were blurry or lacked sufficient depth of field. But once I started pushing the ISO a bit higher and realized that it wasn't actually damaging my image quality, I could still print large and get very clean files using software noise reduction, I gained so much creative control, especially in low light or when shooting handheld. This summer, I was photographing a sunset over the Oregon coast. The light was dim and very overcast. I was shin deep in the water, the waves were dynamic, crashing all around me. Even if I could get my tripod set up in the right spot, the crashing waves would shake the tripod legs, so I'd need to use a higher shutter speed anyway. I usually like to use a tripod for seascapes because then it allows me to fire off multiple frames with the same locked composition and framing and choose the water movement textures I like best later in post. But this time I wanted to see what I could get away with just going handheld. So I toggled auto ISO on and watched it jump to around ISO 6400. Which allowed me to use a shutter speed that was fast enough to freeze the action while still maintaining a decent depth of field and water movement. Sure, there was a bit of noise in the image, and I had slightly more difficult time blending the images in post, but it was a small price to pay for capturing the dynamic energy of the scene. Lightroom's denoise took care of most of the noise anyway. So don't be afraid to experiment with higher ISO settings. Here are a few tips. Every camera has a different tolerance for high ISO noise. Experiment to find the point where the noise becomes unacceptable. When shooting handheld, I enjoy shooting in manual mode, where I can control shutter speed and aperture and let ISO do its thing to balance the exposure. Modern noise reduction tools can work wonders. Learn to use them effectively and minimize noise without sacrificing detail. Sometimes a bit of noise can add character and atmosphere to an image. I've even added it to certain images. Don't be afraid to let it show. Remember, the perfect exposure is the one that captures the moment, even if it means sacrificing a bit of technical perfection. I no longer let the fear of noise hold me back from creating. Now, this next myth is one that's close to my heart. The image of a lone photographer venturing into the wilderness to commune with nature and capture its beauty. It's a romantic notion, isn't it? There's no doubt that solitude can be both a healing medicine for our soul and a powerful tool for our creativity. Spending time alone in nature allows me to connect with my surroundings on a deeper level, observe the subtle nuances of light and shadow, and find inspiration in the quiet moments. Logistically, it's also easier to plan trips on our own, especially when chasing and reacting to weather conditions. But it doesn't have to be a solo thing. Some of my most memorable experiences have been shared with other photographers, my wife, and my non-photographer hiking buddies. Whether it's joining a photography club, attending a workshop, or simply heading out with a friend, sharing our passion with others can be incredibly enriching. It can lead to new friendships, fresh perspectives, and make the process more enjoyable. There's something special about sharing your passion with others. The experience of being in nature together, bouncing ideas off one another, and learning from different perspectives. A trip last year that really stands out is a trip to the Mount Jefferson Wilderness area with two fellow photographers I met on NPN. We spent days exploring, sharing tips, and just soaking up the whole experience. If you're looking for more connection, here are a few tips. Join a photography club or group. It's a great way to meet like-minded people, share your work, and learn from others. Workshops offer amazing opportunities to learn new techniques, gain inspiration, and connect with other photographers in a supporting environment. Don't be afraid to send a message or leave a comment. You might be surprised at how willing people are to share their knowledge and experiences. Photography is a community, not a competition. Sharing my love of photography with others has enriched my creative journey, taught me valuable lessons, and even helped to build lasting friendships and activity partners. And that's a wrap on our two-part series, Debunking Landscape Photography Myths. I hope these have given you some new ideas to play with. Don't let outdated rules or misconceptions hold you back. Embrace creativity, experiment fearlessly, and connect with the incredible community of photographers out there. And I'd love to hear what photography myths you've busted. Drop a comment below. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, where we explore myths around location, light, color, and even the creative process itself, be sure to check it out. And what happens when the sun's directly overhead? I've got you covered. Click here to discover my top tips for mastering harsh light photography. It's where I've made the most creative breakthroughs in the shortest amount of time. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.